Well, we are about a week and a half into the new college basketball season, and there have been plenty of surprises already. What are they? We're going to get right into them.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, it's Thursday, November 17th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college basketball show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Schade, and joining me for the first time this week is the man Leif Thulin from the Locked On NBA Big Boards Podcast. We want to thank you for making our show your first listen or your first watch every single day. Don't forget that we're free and available anywhere you get podcasts. Well, folks, it's great to have Leif with us today. What we're going to do is have several different conversations about what we're seeing so far this season. Surprise teams, both good and bad, because there's been plenty of them. We've got Emoni Bates resurgence, and the weekend is coming, so we're going to give you some upset watch picks. But we want to get right into surprise teams, and I'm going to start off by giving you one out of the ACC that has been a bad surprise. Obviously, it's not Louisville, although poor Cardinals. They are going through something right now. 3 straight 1-point loss victories to start their season. Ugh, yuck. But it is a different 0-3 ACC team that I want to start off talking about, and that is Leonard Hamilton's Florida State Seminoles. Leif, this is brutal. Lost to Stetson, lost to Central Florida, and then most recently back on Monday, lost to Troy. And none of it, it's not like Louisville, 1-point games. They are just going through it. Now, to be fair to Leonard Hamilton's team, a lot of it to me is injuries and suspensions that they're going through. You expect this team, Leonard Hamilton's teams are always deep. You know, it feels like you got 50 guys each averaging 10 to 15 points, 10 to 15 minutes a game. But even a team of his usual depth, when you start losing players like Naheem McLeod and Jalen Gainey, like it makes it very, very difficult to do what you need to do. And so, man, I'm struggling to see how Florida State's going to come back, but it seems like Leonard Hamilton always finds a way to do it. We'll have to keep tabs on this, but early returns are that it is going to be a rough season for the Florida State Seminoles.
Yeah, that one shocked me, particularly because, they lost one to Stetson. You'd think they're going to bounce back and beat Central Florida. I know it was a road game, but, Leonard Hamilton's teams are uniquely built to beat teams in the sense that they have more athletes. They've got more depth. So when you play lower level teams, you should wear the teams out. It's not like playing the ACC when you're running against comparable athletes. And even then, the formula has worked for Leonard Hamilton to wear teams out by playing 12 men. And he has a saying that says, I've got 12 men that are better than your 5. And you'd think that would work against the teams they've played, but it hasn't. So that would be up there on my shocks as well. And for another kind of negative shock, I'll go with the TCU Horned Frogs, who last year really struggled, really finished the year exceptionally well and had scintillating expectations. Granted, they're missing Damian Baugh, who's a returning 2-guard.
Right.
And I was actually at their March Madness run where they beat Seton Hall in impressive fashion and should have or could have or should have beaten Arizona, and it was an amazing.
Should have is definitely.
I'll say should have. I was there. I was in the Arizona section cheering on for TCU. I was in the minority, and I was ready for that one to happen. But the long story short is they've really struggled. They've played teams that have been able to minimize the impact. Their lone loss has come without Mike Miles and Damian Baugh, but I almost disregard that and say that their 2 wins were less impressive than their 1 loss. Like it almost worries me more they had to come back from such a deficit than they lost without their best player and arguably their second best player. So TCU is a team that I thought could compete within the Big 12, which was arguably the best conference in America.
Yeah.
And they're losing or trailing in games to teams that have no business playing the competition level that the TCU will be playing.
Yeah, boy, Big 12 is a gauntlet to run. And if TCU is going to look like this, they might find themselves pretty low in the bottom of those standings. As for good surprises, I got to go with the Michigan State Spartans. I love it. I'm a huge Tom Izzo fan. Always love his teams. And coming into this year, unranked and you think, they'll make it to March, but maybe like a 6, 7, 8, 9 in that range kind of seed. But here they come in a span of 5 days. They lose to Gonzaga by 1 point and then upset Kentucky to kick off the Champions Classic. A fantastic game. Great to get Oscar Tshiebwe back, by the way, in action. But I love it. For a team that's unranked to come within like 2 points of knocking off 2 top 4 teams in 5 days, unreal. You love to see it. One of the things for me is Joey Hauser had a really rough game against Gonzaga and then came out and killed it against Kentucky. If they want to keep doing what they're doing, he's going to have to keep having that type of performance. As for me, I'm not a fan of like, let's slowly eke a team in to the AP top 25. To me, next week when it refreshes, they need to be in the top 10.
I'm with you. I think they need to really jump up the rankings. The issue for going up to the top 10 is the top 8 feel like they're pretty like locked into the spot. But I agree with you. Michigan State, like you ask yourself the question, who's their best player? I would say it's Malik Hall. But then if you go 2 through 6, there could be any sort of computation right there. I mean, I would go with probably AJ Hoggard as their second best player. Madi Sissoko to me is the most improved player in college basketball. And then you've got Tyson Walker, who may lead their team in scoring. Joey Hauser, like you mentioned, had a huge bounce back game. Tom Izzo's always going to have his players playing hard, but I thought this was one of their more undermanned squads.
I did too.
But they lost 3 of their best players, if not their 3 best players from last year's 7 seed team that I didn't think was particularly good. Eked out a win against Davidson, played Duke tough, and now they're arguably a top 10, top 15 team in the country. So this is a masterful coaching job and certainly a pleasant surprise.
Man. Good. Leif, anybody else for you that has been a pleasant surprise outside of the Spartans?
Yeah, there's one team that I expected to start out with the same record they have, but the way they've done it has stood out to me, and that's the St. Mary's Gales. I've always been a fan of Randy Bennett's teams, the way they're very methodical. They play good defense, they run good offensive sets and get the ball inside, but they lost some core identities to their team. They lost a pick and roll savant and Tommy Kuzi. They lost their interior presence in Fotu and Toss, and they somehow found a way to figure that out and win in dominating fashion against what I would describe as pretty good competition for when you're a WCC team and you're scheduling your non-conference. I would say they scheduled pretty menacingly. I mean, obviously Gonzaga is the preeminent example. They have to schedule like these big dogs, but they've been able to beat teams like North Texas. It was top 80 the last few years as a mid-major. I think it was 5 years straight. North Texas was the top 80 team in KenPom, and they dismantled them, beat them by 30, only giving up 33 points to a team that beat Purdue just a few years ago in the NCAA tournament and has the same cast of characters there. They also were able to beat a very good Vermont team and I believe Oral Roberts. So that's a very impressive slate to kind of conquer with ease. So I'm impressed by Randy Bennett's squad, and I'm curious to see if they'll be represented within the top 25.
Man, yes, you certainly hope so. Always love to see more representation out of the West Coast Conference, especially as you think about BYU shuttling out of it next season. Well, Leif, we have to talk about Mr. Emoni Bates. What a beginning to his new career in Eastern Michigan. Did it take going from Memphis to Eastern Michigan for him to live up to his hype? We'll unpack it in a moment. But first, this episode is brought to you by Nugenics. I tell you what, folks, as I get into the holidays, my eating habits go out the window, and I got a straight up dad bod at this point. I don't have the time to work out, but like you all, I want the energy and body I once had. You want more energy to counter the negative physical effects of aging? Well, Nugenics Total T Testosterone Booster with Testofen will help you turn back the clock, re-energize your workouts, and get you better results at the gym while helping you look and feel like the man you really want to be. Nugenics Total T is the #1 selling testosterone booster at GNC. So get a complimentary bottle of Nugenics Total T right now when you text college to 231-231. Again, text now and get a bottle of Nugenics Thermo, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, with key ingredients to help you get back in shape fast. Absolutely free. Again, text college to 231-231. One more time, that's college to 231-231. Texting enrolls you in recurring automated text messages. Consent not required to purchase. Messages and data rates may apply. All the legalese for us today. Leif Thulin, you love to hear it all the way. By the way, folks, for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only we at Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and anywhere else you get podcasts. All right, Leif. So here's the situation. Emoni Bates, one of the most heralded prospects in a long time, as a 15, 16-year-old, is on magazine covers and getting proclaimed as the next big thing, and comes to Memphis and lays an absolute turd last season. It was frankly disappointing, underwhelming, and now, for a variety of reasons, including Penny not wanting him back, he transfers to Eastern Michigan, back home in Ypsilanti. And so he missed Eastern Michigan's first game, serving a suspension for some questionable deeds earlier this year, but has been back now for 2 games, both losses, a close one to Michigan, 88-83, and again on Tuesday night to Bradley, 89-61. Now, here's the thing. Emoni Bates' career high at Memphis was 17 in his season premiere career starter against Tennessee Tech. He's broken that in each of his first 2 games at Eastern Michigan. Career high 30 points against Michigan, followed it up on Tuesday with 20 against Bradley. So here's the conversation I want to have, Leif. Is this real, the Eastern Michigan version of Emoni Bates? Is this more in line with the prospect we thought we had? Or is it too soon to call, and it's really the Memphis Emoni Bates? Where do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhere in between, and that's, I think, where everyone's going to be. I would lean a little bit more on the skeptical side because he scored 30 against Michigan, and that was very impressive, but Michigan's not a team that suffocates you defensively. They have youthful players on the wings. Jet Howard's a supremely talented player in his own right, but he's young, and he wasn't even always on him. And then you score 20 against Bradley, but your team, and this isn't necessarily specific to him, but you lose by 20. And that concerns me as well. I think the hype was unfair to him, and it was unreal coming out. Like you were seeing him as a 13-year-old saying the next KD, and that's not fair to anyone. But I think the reason he's getting some of this stock and this hype, and even still, is because of those YouTube videos 6-7 years ago. If this were to happen to someone that was a highly regarded recruit that didn't have those videos and the claims of being the next KD, I think people would write him off and say, okay, he's good, but he's not an NBA draft caliber player because he didn't do this at the higher level. So I think he'll need to have a few more of those type of games. His efficiency has been impressive. And then one thing I'll put in there is that he's so thin. It makes me worried if I put on my scout perspective for the NBA draft big board.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to say that, wow, I want him defending a couple of these players that will be playing at the next level. So his shot is the one thing I've never really questioned. He's got a great touch. He's got great form. And he's a shot maker. He's taken some questionable ones in his career, but he can make shots. But I don't know if you can not be able to defend and be that thin. And the only person that really comes to mind that's had this kind of same track record is Michael Porter Jr. But he's one of the best shooters in the entire NBA, and he's a little bigger, and he's certainly thicker. Yeah, and he's definitely still a poor defender. So it gives you a little bit of a scary. So I'm a little bit on the skeptic side here.
Yeah, I would have to go that way as well. Like competition, teammates, I think all of that factors into it. I think probably the bigger part of this conversation for me is his dad in this whole thing, creating a school for him and all that. I feel like that has done a disservice to his progression. Now, I'm sure his parents love him and want the best for him and all of that stuff, but I just feel like him not having the opportunity to be pushed and challenged in different ways at the high school level essentially stunted his growth. Obviously, we know he came in a year early, and that can have some factors into it. Maybe that year of, I'll say maturation, but based on some decisions we've seen, you kind of question some of that. But like, if we see this, if he's averaging 22, 25 a game throughout the season at Eastern Michigan, I mean, at a high major capacity, we saw it last year. He's going to be under 20. And so you have to factor that in is who is Eastern Michigan playing in the MAC and those kind of things. So I'm with you. And obviously you have a bigger perspective as somebody that does a lot of draft prospect stuff. And so if you had to plant your flag in the ground today and make a call, when we get to next summer, are we hearing Emoni Bates' name called in the 2023 NBA draft?
I'd say confidently not in the first round.
Okay.
I think there's a way he can sneak in the backside because there's more upside than most people that would be drafted in the second round.
Sure.
Like you look at most second rounds, it's usually older players that can be valuable as a defender, and there's a little bit of upside. There's usually a lot of foreign players. He's got more intrigue because of that shooting capacity. So I won't rule out hearing his name, but I'll say pretty confidently I don't see him being a first round pick.
Yeah. As you guys process this, you and Raphael and the guys on Big Board, when you have something like him getting into trouble with the law like he did recently, how much of a factor or negative factor is that NBA GMs take into consideration?
I mean, it's hard to know because we don't know the entire story. I like to think when I watch them, I like to see their mannerisms on the court as just determining how good of a character they are for their team. And so time will tell on that because I think at times at Memphis, you saw him engaged and he looked good. Like, for instance, when they played Gonzaga in the second round of the tournament and he came in off the bench and embraced the role of being a three-point shooter and defending on the wing, guarding Julian Strother, I thought he did a good job.
Yeah.
That said, this type of team that doesn't have the surplus of talent that Memphis had, I'm curious to see how he'll handle being with teammates that are lesser talents and how he handles losing. Is it with grace or is it with frustration? So I think time will tell on that one. And because of the details of the law aren't exactly communicated to people of our ranks, and they may be to the people actually drafting, it's hard for me to influence. So I just kind of go off their basketball alone. But it certainly doesn't help. I'll put it that way. Like it's not a rave review that you hear and you're like, okay, like at worst, this guy's going to be a phenomenal teammate. Yes. So that there's a little bit of concern, but not too much.
Okay. Eyebrows raised, but we are not writing him off for sure. Going to be very interesting to keep tabs on Emoni Bates this season, see what he's doing and how he's progressing as compared to last year at Memphis. Well, we have had some nice upsets already this college basketball season. Of course, we expect a treasure trove more. Who are Leif and I looking at this weekend to be on upset alert? Well, we'll tell you in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, BetOnline has it all. And if you love sports podcasts, well, first check out Locked On, but then you can find a bunch of those at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Okay, Leif. So we come to our second weekend of college basketball action. It's the weekend before Thanksgiving, so we're getting ready and excited for all the MTEs coming up next week. It's like Christmas for me on Thanksgiving week. I cannot wait to just sit and watch a treasure trove of basketball. But let's start talking about who we are going to put on upset watch this weekend.
My first one is the Indiana Hoosiers in the Gavitt games. I think playing at the Cintas Center for Xavier, that's a formidable home crowd. Xavier's also a formidable team. Absolutely. They've got the rare combination of experience and size in the front court that is comparable to that of the Hoosiers with Trace Jackson-Davis and Race Thompson and with Zach Fremantle and Jack Nunge. And they've also got a few guards that I think are really Big Ten caliber or guards playing in the Big East that I think are hiding in plain sight. Colby Jones is someone we've discussed on the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. And I think he's probably the best guard in this game. And I tend to, when I think of a March Madness bracket, I say, who's got the better guards? And I think it's the same thing early on in the season. Who can establish tempo? Who can be the more experienced team, who hits more shots. And I think Xavier's got a really good chance to beat the number 12 team in the country, who's coming in with high expectations in the Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, that's a great call. The Gavitt game's there. That game is Friday night, 6 o'clock Eastern on FS1. Make sure you check it out. I want to stay with Friday night for a game. This one, less so of an upset. It's Virginia at Baylor. It's, the 16th team in the nation versus the 5th team in the nation. But if you look at KenPom, they're 5-6. These two teams are very close together. But I think, especially coming off of Virginia kind of having a downturn the past couple years, most people around the nation are still kind of coming around on what is Virginia now, and Baylor having the success they've had the last several years. I think nationally people look at these teams in two different views, but they are much closer than people would imagine. But I love games like this that pit Virginia's pack line defense under Tony Bennett against just this incredibly athletic team that Scott Drew always has down in Waco. I love freshman Keontae George. I love him pairing with Adam Flagler and just making a 3-guard lineup. Really interesting stuff. I'm curious to see how Kihei Clark can do against him. I know it's his 5th year at Virginia, but he's so diminutive, so undersized. I just don't know if his capabilities will match up with Baylor, but Virginia does just enough to bother you with that defense to where you just have to stay so dialed in for an entire shot clock and another entire shot clock if you can't grab a rebound, that this game should be really interesting. And it's Friday night, 7 o'clock Eastern on ESPN2.
Yeah, that's an interesting game. I think that Baylor's got the rare ability to shoot the ball over the pack line, where the pack line basically dares you to shoot threes a little bit beyond the arc and hit threes. I think that the key to that game is can Baylor get a few free baskets pushing, because they gamble and get in passing lanes. Virginia's not a particularly dynamic offense. They're slow, but that doesn't mean they're not good. A few years ago when they won the national championship, they were the top KenPom offense, despite playing a slower pace. This year, I think they have to work harder to score. They don't have an answer like Kyle Guy or DeAndre Hunter or Ty Jerome. And so I think Baylor pulls away in that one because they've got the guards to match up with the defensive chops of the guards of Virginia. But I do think Reese Beekman guarding Keontae George will be very interesting.
Yes.
I'll stay in that same tournament, though. I think Illinois, and like you said, not a humongous upset should it happen. Illinois could trouble UCLA because UCLA is adapting. I think they've looked very good so far this season. They do have 2 players returning that are phenomenal, and they have a few other players returning that are taking new roles. But Jalen Clark has thrived right now as being the glue guy extraordinaire, but he's playing against subpar competition. Now all of a sudden he's facing an athlete that's a better athlete than him in Terrence Shannon.
Yes.
Illinois' got moving pieces, but I think they've got, if you look roster to roster, that's a pretty much equal talent split. So I would favor UCLA, but I think personally, if an upset were to happen of the lower team winning in that tournament, I would say that Illinois is more likely to beat UCLA than Virginia is to beat Baylor. But that said, I'm super eager to watch those.
Yes. I'll give one more for me. This is a game coming up on Sunday afternoon, noon Eastern on ACC Network, and that is James Madison visiting North Carolina. And you think, okay, mid-major at the number 1 team in the land. But listen, let's be honest about this. For anyone who has seen North Carolina early this season, they have not looked like the number 1 team in the country. Just escaped on Tuesday night with a victory, and man, they need to figure some things out. These Tar Heels do. Now, when people look at a schedule and see mid-majors, I think they think, oh, walk over, this team's in the 150s, 200s. But this is a great reminder that not all mid-majors are created equal. James Madison is in the top 100. They're 82nd right now at KenPom. They are 4-0 against Valley Forge, but Hampton, Buffalo, Howard, these are not chump teams, all of them. And these games have been absolute blowouts. They're raining threes. I think they had 13 or 15 in their most recent game on Tuesday against Howard. And so it should be a tough game, although, of course, KenPom only gives them a 13% chance to win this game. But if North Carolina continues to perform as it does, they are certainly on upset alert. We got to figure out where is the ACC preseason player of the year, Armando Bacot. He's been essentially a non-factor other than the second half of Carolina's game against College of Charleston last weekend.
I agree. That was one I was planning on highlighting. And I think that James Madison has beaten quality opponents, and not only beaten them, they've beat them down. Like Buffalo, typically, when you look at a preseason schedule, that's a team that stands out to me as like, oh, they can pull an upset. And I thought about that game, and I was like, man, James Madison's an 11-point favorite against Buffalo. Like, what is this? And then James Madison beat them by 40. So I'm not saying that they're going to beat North Carolina, but I think North Carolina will have to play significantly better than they have in order to win by the same margin that they've won their previous games. And I think there's something to be said for, there's a lot of chemistry for the Tar Heels coming back on a championship caliber run where they came up just short, but they don't have a bench right now. And James Madison's, if they could get someone in foul trouble, namely Armando Bacot would be the main one. If you were to choose, if you're the James Madison coach, like, hey, who can we choose to get in foul trouble? Bacot would be the guy.
That's right.
If there's foul trouble, there's a significant drop off because Puff Johnson has been out. The Jalen Washington has been limited, and you've got just Seth Trimble. I almost called him Mellow Trimble, but Seth Trimble is good, but he's not RJ Davis nor Caleb Love, and so I think that should there be a drop off, foul trouble, this could be a very interesting game.
100%. Okay, folks, there are 4 games from Leif, Thulin, and I for you to watch out for this weekend. Some great basketball, and it's going to be a great another week of it next week. Make sure you tune in. Tomorrow, we've got a bonus episode coming up for you with national champion Louisville point guard, Mr. Peyton Siva. I'm going to talk to him about everything that's been going on with the Louisville program recently. Thank you so much for making Locked On College Basketball your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and of course, the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and anywhere else you get podcasts. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show. And for those of you watching on YouTube, you can hit the like button and comment on your upset watch picks or some other teams that have surprised you so far this season. For Leif, Thulin, I'm Isaac Schade, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Peace.